The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television.
This is on the big jig too, so it could be a big walleye. Yep, it's a big walleye. Yeah, a really nice one.
When you think of southwestern Minnesota, you think of this flat prairie land, but then there's this huge river valley that runs through it that has this very, very unique history.
The river is a spectacular place to paddle and kayak, and the scenery is spectacular. It's kind of a wildlife haven in the middle of what's thought of by most people as southwest Minnesota farm country.
The open prairie of the upper Midwest is home and a destination for people who love the outdoors. To hunt, fish, and enjoy outdoor recreation provided by our vast resources of lakes, rivers, trails, and grasslands. Here we connect with the natural world and leave the stresses of our daily lives behind.
Welcome to Prairie Sportsman. I'm your host, Brett Amundsen. This episode, we're featuring Tatanka Bluffs on the upper Minnesota River. Join us for some fishing, kayaking, and touring through this beautiful hidden treasure on the river.
Funding for this project was provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, and by American Surplus, Ice Castle Fish House RV, Minnesota's largest manufacturer of premium portable ice fish houses, and a proud supporter of the annual February Ice Castle Classic Fishing Tournament. More information at icecastlefh.com. And by Live Wide Open, a regional movement that encourages people to make a great life for themselves in west central Minnesota. More at livewideopen.com.
Along the Tatanka Bluffs corridor of the Minnesota River, Tom Kalahar can frequently be found fishing for catfish, walleye, sturgeon, or whatever happens to be biting that day. We caught up with Tom on the shores of the river near Renville, where he had just rigged up his line for some hungry fish.
Now we'll see if we can catch walleye. And this is what I'm going to be using. It's a big eye jig, and it's a glow jig. And I just got a kind of a dirty white Mr. Twister tail. And I'm going to throw it out here in this current, and I'm going to try to work where the creek water is meeting the river water. And we'll see if there's any big predators like walleyes or northerns that are hanging around here. If they are, we might catch one. I did catch a 28.5-inch walleye here the last time I fished here. So we'll throw it out there and we'll see what happens. Now, as you can see, the water's about 3 feet deep right here, and that's plenty of water for any type of predator to be hanging out and trying to ambush bait fish.
In rivers, fish tend to stay close to the bottom and in small areas, so it's important to fish a fair amount of real estate to locate where they're hanging out. Tom's got some big heavy jigs on, and it's in constant contact with the river bottom as he slowly bounces it along. He casts where the fresh creek water comes into the Minnesota, as that's where these predatory fish go to eat the bait fish that are flowing in from the slower water.
Because of the turbidity of the water, they use the lateral line on their body in order to be able to pick up the vibrations of your jig as it hits the bottom and bounces along, and they locate it, and then they get close enough in order to actually see it. And so you have to fish slow enough for all that to happen. And if you do, you're going to give that fish every opportunity to find that bait and every opportunity to eat it. And most people, you just simply can't fish rivers like you do lakes. Most people, when they fish a river, they fish way too fast. And it's all about slow. When these larger walleyes and northerns or smallmouth bass, when they hit this thing, they mean business. There's no nibbles. It's boom, and they've got it. And you set the hook properly, you're going to catch it. Here I got a good fish. Oh, this is a pretty good one. And this is on the big jig too, so it could be a big walleye. Yep, it's a big walleye. And a really nice one. Hand land this guy, maybe. Let's see if I can do it. I got the net, but I'm too lazy to get back. This is a walleye pipe, and it's 23 inches long. And I'm guessing it weighs probably, about 5 pounds. Yeah, and it's a real typical size that you're going to catch on the Minnesota River. There's a lot of big walleyes at the Minnesota River. But it's a very nice fish. I don't try to keep fish much bigger than 17 inches. So this girl is going to go back in the water here, and she'll spawn next summer and create another generation of walleyes.
After catching the first walleye, Tom decides to try one of his homemade spinners.
I just want just enough weight to keep it near the bottom, but not enough in order to impede my feel. And it's a real simple rig. I've been using it for years, and it's caught 28, 29-inch walleyes. It's caught 20-pound catfish, sturgeons, carp, sheepheads, just about everything that swims in the river, turtles. And so I stick with it, whatever works. And sometimes just keep it simple is the best thing. There we go. Now we got, I think we got another walleye. See, rough fish. Yep. There we are. We got another walleye here. We come to catch catfish, and we're catching walleyes. And I'm going to go ahead and keep this fish because my wife and I love walleye. And if we catch another catfish or something along the way yet today, we can have a meal of fish. And the rule of thumb for eating fish is let the big ones go, just simply because of the advisories in the waters these days. You're better off to eat smaller fish. And besides that, smaller fish are just that much easier to cook up. And the bigger fish tend to be your breeders. So it's important to protect the breeding population of fish too. There's a fish. Let's see what we got here. And this is a freshwater drum. A real typical fish of the Minnesota River. This is a little one. And because of the cold water, they are biting extremely light. It's a freshwater drum, and they kind of get a bad rap because they're not a bad eating fish. They got nice white flaky flesh. And the larger ones I will smoke, and they're excellent smoked fish. One thing I've noticed in the river in the last couple of years is the increase in smallmouth bass, which is a good thing, real nice. And we have a increasing population of shovel-nosed sturgeon.
Tom wants to try for a catfish, so he heads out in his canoe.
People have a fairly negative opinion of what the river is, but remarkably, it's a darn good fishery. It's world-class, as far as I'm concerned, channel catfishing, and there's great flathead catfishing. We didn't have to work too hard to catch a few walleyes. People tend to ignore what they have in their own backyard, so to speak. So. And the Minnesota River is viewed by a lot of people as being foul and dirty. And the water is pretty turbid, but it's basically a pretty clean river. Now, if you look, you can see the heavy current just right out here, and then this bunch of wood down trees, and like I said, that breaks the current and makes it possible for these fish to not fight the current, to relax. And besides that, the bait fish, they tend to hide up underneath all this wood, and so these kind of places are the hunting ground for all kinds of species of fish. I don't think I've ever been skunked fishing on the Minnesota River. I've always caught something, and that just that's attributed to the vast amount of species that are in this river. There's almost always something biting here. There we go. Whoa! You gotta hit this, guys. I got him too. He hit it hard. Whoa, 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 whoa. Well, we don't know what we got. Let's see. It's a carp. But you see that? Now, how much fun is that? Whoa! Ladies and gentlemen, here's a carp. A lot of these in the Minnesota River, but boy, I'll tell you, to take kids down and catch these, I've had kids just scream with glee. They break their lines, they do all kinds of things, and I've had kids just think that it's the greatest day they've ever had fishing, and all they've caught is a half a dozen of these carp. And these things get big too. They'll get 40 pounds too. So, you know, fishing is fishing, and we don't always have to catch big old walleyes. But I can come down here and spend several days on the Minnesota River and run into fewer people than I do in the boundary waters. And the fishing is as good. So I spent a lot of time down here just for those reasons. Solitude, it's a wilderness experience right in my own backyard. And the fishing opportunities are excellent.
My name is Kylie Couture. I work with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I'm a natural resource specialist and have been working with the Aquatic Invasive Species Program for a little over 2 years now. I am here out on White Bear Lake. It's partially in Ramsey County, also Washington County. And we're out here today to talk about some of the invasive species that are in this lake. One in particular is Eurasian water milfoil. It's a submersed plant, so it grows underneath the water. It's been here since about the late 1980s, and Eurasian water milfoil typically has anywhere from 12 to 21 leaflets. You can see here the leaves themselves are pretty delicate and they don't hold their shape. It can be a nuisance and actually mat at the surface, so boaters can't get through and water skiers can't get through, so it disrupts recreational use. It can also displace native aquatic plants that will ultimately have an impact on fish habitat as well as wildlife.
Fishermen, recreational boat users, anyone who has watercraft on the lake, the key points to remember are to clean, drain, and dispose.
This segment has been brought to you by the Aquatic Invasive Species Task Forces of Big Stone, Candy, Ojai, and Yellow Medicine counties.
Spectacular views along the Tatanka Bluffs corridor on the upper Minnesota River can be enjoyed by land or water. On a crisp fall day, we toured the area with Loran Kaardal. He serves on the board of the Tatanka Bluffs corridor, which is promoting the area as a tourist and outdoor recreation destination. The valley was carved at the end of the Ice Age, when Lake Agassiz was drained by the glacial river Loran that flushed out everything in its way except for the river's hard granite bedrock. Tatanka is the Lakota word for bison. The river corridor bearing its name stretches from Granite Falls to New Ulm and includes high river bluffs, granite outcroppings that support prickly pear cactus, an abundance of county and state parks, and miles of recreational trails.
Our vision for the Minnesota River Valley is to develop recreational opportunities, to have this become a competitive regional recreation destination for hunting, fishing, camping, and your trail sports, whether it be walking, hiking, biking, horseback riding.
Some of the best hiking in the area is through the Lower Sioux Agency, about 7 miles east of Redwood Falls near Morton. There, about 145 families from the Lower Sioux Indian community live on roughly 1,700 acres of tribal land. The community is part of the Midewiwakaton Band of Dakota, which originated in what is now Minnesota. Cheyanne St. John of the Lower Sioux Indian community showed us around the agency.
The primary resource that we have here is our extensive trail system in addition to our programming. We get a lot of hikers that come through here to take advantage of the river trail, to access the ferry crossing, as well as our interpretive center, which has the historical exhibit on the U.S.-Dakota War and Dakota culture.
The Lower Sioux Agency's historic site features beautiful masonry work in a warehouse built in 1861.
The warehouse was basically built by a Scottish carpenter and some Dakota farmer volunteers that were living here in the agency. Its primary purpose was to provide security for the annuities, provisions, and equipment that was being shipped from Fort Snelling here to the agency for the Dakota people.
But after the government failed to live up to its treaty, war broke out at the Lower Sioux Agency on August 18, 1862, and it spread rapidly along the upper Minnesota River Valley. A piece of that U.S.-Dakota War history can be found on the agency's river trail at the ferry crossing site.
When these soldiers were dispatched from Fort Ridgely, they crossed the Minnesota River right at that ferry crossing where they were met by Dakota warriors, and they were ambushed and attacked there. So very few of those soldiers made it back or escaped that attack, and that is the site of the ferry crossing, and that's a little bit of its history.
After the war, the Dakota people were exiled from Minnesota. In the 1880s, Midewiwakaton families started returning to their homeland, and a few of them purchased land that became the Lower Sioux community.
When I think of the Minnesota River Valley, I really think of historically of the three major eruptions. And the original eruption was the formation, the volcanic eruption and formation of the granite rock outcrops, coming to the surface. The second eruption was the aquatic eruption, or the berm breaking in Lake Agassiz and the glacial River Warren just pouring out and carving out this valley. The third eruption is the cultural eruption and the clash of European settlement with the Dakota people in 1862, and the history that that has left us with. And so it makes this a very unique destination, where when you think of southwestern Minnesota, you think of this flat prairie land, but then there's this huge river valley that runs through it that has this very, very unique history, and to be shared with those who are willing to take the time to come and explore.
One of the best ways to enjoy Tatanka Bluffs on the Minnesota River is by water. Ted Suss of Lucan, Minnesota is enjoying his retirement, paddling the Minnesota River by canoe or kayak, and working with local groups to make the area an outdoor recreation destination.
The thing I like most about kayaking and canoeing on the Minnesota River is it's just phenomenally scenic. There are places where you go along where trees on both sides of the water. You can't see any farm fields or any houses There's no power lines, there's no roads or bridges. You can go for 2 or 3 miles on the river, and you'd swear you're in the middle of a wilderness area. And then every so often you come to these gigantic rock outcroppings that shoot straight up from the water 20, 30 feet. It might be a wall the size of a wall in a high school gymnasium. Or there'll be boulders in the water or on the shore that are the size of a house. And they're just fantastic to look at. And then as you paddle, I've never paddled on the Minnesota River where I have not seen at least one bald eagle.
Ted pointed out several features along the Minnesota that make Tatanka Bluffs a tourism destination, like Alexander Ramsey Park in Redwood Falls, known as the Little Yellowstone of Minnesota.
It's kind of a hidden treasure in southwest Minnesota. But the falls here in Redwood Falls on Ramsey Creek it's very accessible with trails. A lot of the creeks that come into the Minnesota River, almost every creek that comes into the Minnesota River goes over a falls at some point. Ramsey Park is kind of one of the gemstones of the Minnesota River Valley, and quite frankly the whole state of Minnesota. We hear that it's the largest municipal park in the state. That bridge over there was built by the WPA. The plaque on the side of the bridge says 1938. It's made out of granite blocks that I'm guessing were probably quarried somewhere near here. They call it the Swayback Bridge, and if you take a look at it, you can see why it's called the Swayback Bridge. It drops down into the valley a couple of feet, I think 3 or 4 feet from each end, and it's very picturesque, and it's similar to the WPA buildings in a lot of the state parks and national parks across the country, with the cut granite, very solid construction, very heavy construction, and we're just delighted that it was rebuilt by the city of Redwood Falls.
About a 3-hour paddle downstream from Redwood Falls, there is a canoe landing with trails that lead to a picnic shelter and campground. The Charles Eastman Trailhead Facility was built by the city of Morton with funds from the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. It is named after Charles Alexander Eastman, a Dakota doctor, author, and speaker who grew up in the Redwood Falls area and was educated at Boston University.
He was hired shortly after he finished medical school to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and in effect created the Indian Health Service. He was one of the founders of the Boy Scouts of America, and really quite a famous person that most of us haven't heard about.
All of these features on the Minnesota are being promoted by the Tatanka Bluffs Corridor, a public-private partnership in Redwood and Renville counties that is promoting tourism, outdoor recreation, and economic development. The corridor is among a myriad of organizations devoted to cleaning up and enhancing the Minnesota River Valley.
The Minnesota River has kind of a bad rap. I don't think it's fair. The water is always a little bit dark. It's always got a lot of sediment in it because it drains really lush farmland, and even if it's going through non-farm areas, it's draining heavy black soil. The main villain with sediment from the river is when the water goes up and down, it has a tendency to take more of the riverbanks with it. When the water comes up and it's rushing downstream, that water is hitting the riverbanks and chewing it away. And then when it drops back down, those wet banks drop in and they flow down the river. So we need to control the flow, which could mean more water storage in the valley, on the edges of fields, possibly restore some wetlands. The Minnesota River is not polluted in the sense of a lot of toxic waste. There is not a lot of manufacturing along the river that produces the kind of hazardous and toxic waste that you think about when you think of water pollution. It's mostly the sediment. But other than that, the river is a spectacular place to paddle and kayak. And the scenery is spectacular. There's rock outcroppings, there's bluffs. Every time I paddle on the river, I see deer, I see eagles, I see turkeys and turtles and otters. I mean, it's kind of a wildlife haven in the middle of what's thought of by most people as southwest Minnesota farm country.
You asked and we listened. I'm Amanda Anderson, Digital Media Specialist for Prairie Sportsman. The Q&A section of each episode is powered by questions from Prairie Sportsman viewers. Today's first question. What plans does the DNR have to control excess weeds in Minnesota's lakes, and who do you contact with the problem?
I'm Allison Gamble. I'm the Invasive Species Specialist for the southern region of Minnesota. Minnesota has about 150 species of native aquatic plants. Most are beneficial because they provide food and habitat and protect shoreline and water quality. However, the DNR permits plant removal by landowners when it does more good than harm. Contact the DNR if you are interested in a plant control permit.
And question number 2. Can chronic wasting disease be spread by the transport of game from place to place?
My name is Adam Murkowski. I am the Big Game Program Leader for the Minnesota DNR. Yes, there's a number of ways that the disease can be spread, and those include the live transportation of animals. CWD, the infectious agent, is very resilient, so a carcass can infect other deer for periods of time. So if you know or you suspect that deer, have the disease, then you should be doing everything you can to, leave high-risk parts, so the head, spine, bones, as close to where you harvested that deer as possible.
Thanks for asking.
Funding for this project was provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, and by American Surplus, Ice Castle Fish House RV, Minnesota's largest manufacturer of premium portable ice fish houses, and a proud supporter of the annual February Ice Castle Classic Fishing Tournament. More information at icecastlefh.com.